Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us. And you can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where we have all the interviews, some great guests. And we also actually have power clips, which are kind of the gold, the nuggets that we kind of mine of the full interviews. And so those are there for you as well. I'm really excited about my guest today. Darcy Hawkshurst is with me. Darcy, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just kind of give a quick little introduction, Darcy, on kind of a little bit about your story and what you're doing. But Darcy helps children, and I'll just give you your website from the start, and we'll spell her name so we can get that out of the way. It'll also be on your screen. But DarcyHawkshurst.com is the website, and that is Darcy with an I and then HAWXHURST.com, and it's real solutions for your child's learning. This work that Darcy does with children was born out of her own story, which in my opinion is kind of the best kind of work. And Darcy and I have something in common, which is we're both parents of a child who had a brain injury at some level. And we both found the folks at Domen International, which is an organization in Philadelphia, a nonprofit that helps brain injured children to grow, to develop, to survive, and in many cases to thrive. So domeninternational.org is their website. That they have helped my family in our situation with our daughter, and they've also been really instrumental in Darcy's life as well. So Darcy, just kind of start with your own story, kind of where you grew up, and then kind of take us to Haley and kind of that chapter, and we'll start from there.
Sure, I'm happy to share. To be honest with you, much of my life that happened before Haley is not of much interest, except as a contrast point. I think, I was a single young woman in college when I had Haley, and I joke about this when I write in my book. My memoir in progress about this story as well is that I was. My life was full of some complacency, maybe is too strong of a word, but I really didn't have a strong sense of purpose. And so enter, this fiery little Leo baby who came down with spinal meningitis at 12 days old. So, imagine this fussy baby in the middle of the night. I was young. I was a new mother. I had, some really strong instincts, but not a lot of experience. And so my mother said, take her temperature, and it comes out to like almost 104, like, oh gosh, she's tiny, this tiny little newborn baby with a high fever. So, it all was quite a whirlwind of events that ended up with both of us for a couple of weeks in a hospital, Haley in an incubator full of tubes and wires. Those couple of weeks later, she was diagnosed with just this huge list of labels already, at barely a month old. So it was quite an experience. I mean, we did almost lose her. There was a pretty hairy, scary night with, a tired new nurse on duty who couldn't get an IV changed, and the seizures wouldn't stop, and no one knew what medication to use. It was already too much medication for a baby of this size, and nobody knew what to do. It was it's a dramatic story, and looking back on it from where I am now, I can see the absolute perfection in the gift of that. Everything unfolded in a way that gave us this tremendous gift for Haley to be brain injured. They named all the different places. I remember that moment in a hospital corridor. My parents were there, some friends were there, and a bunch of people in white coats were trying to explain to me, they're using words I had never heard before, talking about all the different places where they had found her brain to be bleeding and all the tests that they had done. And nobody knew at that point what was going to happen. They knew what she was at risk for, but they didn't know what was going to happen. And they told me to take her home and raise her like a normal child. I mean, what does that even mean? You know, how can I even learn to sleep in a dark room again? You know, I had not left her side. And I think that's where, you know, Haley might disagree with me. This is the, you know, two sides to this coin. But one of the gifts of my personality was that I was just tenacious and stubborn. I was too stubborn to leave her side. I wasn't going to the Ronald McDonald House with the other moms to drink coffee. I mean, you know, I was sitting there next to this newborn baby in an incubator, day upon day and night upon night under fluorescent lighting. And, you know, that's just kind of one example of the stubbornness that I carried, because so there we were at home. You know, she's a month old. She's got this big bottle of phenobarbital. She's at risk for seizures and hearing disorders and visual problems and learning problems and motor problems. The list was long. And I felt like it was this ticking time bomb. Like, how was I supposed to know what was going to happen and when? And we knew stimulation would be really important for her, but how and what? So, you know, I raised Haley the best that I could with my family's help. And, you know, she was adorable and fierce and you know, and brain injured, you know, brain injured. So by the time she was 3, she was not keeping up with her peers. We had tried every early intervention. She was wearing glasses and orthotics and taking, I think, 3 or 4 different seizure medicines and having more seizures and having tantrums and not sleeping through the night, you know. So her life was rough, which meant, you know, my life was rough. So I was a hot mess. I was probably, you know, the stories are kind of funny now, but I was a terrible mother. You know, I wasn't patient. You know, here's this child, and we'll talk more about it as we go along, but this child who you take her into a mall or a grocery store, we learned later, you know, she had auditory hypersensitivity. So but the world doesn't know that. They're just looking at this strung out mother with this screaming child, and we didn't know what to do. So by the time she was 4, I found the Doman Method program and took that what to do class, and just, you know, our life changed on a dime in that moment, because I thought, okay, there is something we can do. And there is a very clear root cause here. It's in the brain. And I was lucky. I was told my child had, you know, frontal lobe and occipital lobe and temporal lobe damage to her brain. The kids that I work with in my practice may not have had such a dramatic past. You know, they're simply not thriving. They're struggling to learn because their brain's disorganized, and nobody knows why. So we were very lucky in that way. But it was not going to be okay with me. I kept thinking, this can't be my life. This cannot be my child. This is not at all the way I wanted this thing to go. So I cannot settle for this. Some people say to me, oh, you know, because we did. So we spent, when she was 4, I found the program. It's an intensive treatment program. I mean, I had to learn a lot and quickly, right? And apply it. And so this was years. This was years of intense rehabilitation. And my daughter is in the other room right now. She lives at home for college. She is a university student. She's studying entrepreneurship and nutrition science. Yeah, she was at, you know, anatomy lab today, trying to get some extra credit points, and she's doing great. And so that's why it's very important to me to tell this story, because so many kids are going to be left frustrated and struggling. And I remember that life. And I think, you know, people will say to me, oh, the gifts that you have, that you are so hardworking, or, you know, they want to compliment me on the qualities of myself that allowed me to do this work. It was long and hard journey, no doubt. But it's not as hard as what we were living before, or what Haley's life now if we hadn't done it, right? But I love a good compliment, like anybody, but, you know, the truth is, it's a lot of our success I really owe to what I didn't have. And I just didn't have the ability to accept that prognosis for her. I just didn't have the ability to not hope it would be better. So that's what I'm here to tell this story. I mean, my dad would disagree, but I'm not special. Haley's not special. This is something that can be done. And it's a change, it's like a paradigm shift, it's a changing of perspective, I think. And it's, the truth is I believed in my own belief that it was possible more than I believed anything anybody else said that didn't go with that. So
Beautiful.
in a nutshell, then that's our story. It is a story of hope. And I'm passionate about spreading that hope because I believe that I see kids every day. I meet children every day that have a similar state of brain disorganization that my daughter had. And I look wistfully at them, thinking that it could be better.
Yeah.
We can make it better. And that's not to be disrespectful of where they are.
Right.
But we can make it better, right? So
Well,
I think what would they try
there's
if they had that hope? If they knew it was possible, would they try, right?
Yeah. There's so many different questions that just spurs, but I want to start with just kind of for people who are watching who may not know. So you and I have both been back to Philadelphia to see the Domans, and with a lot of questions and not a lot of clarity at the beginning. And then what happens is you mentioned the course. So there's a course that you take as a new person back there, a new person who's involved with the Doman method, the Doman family and the Doman method. And it's a course that basically teaches you about the brain, how it works, how, what happens when there are certain injuries, and then most of all, what you can do. And so I want to say that as a starting point, because it was really amazing for us to learn about that. And I'm sure it was for you too, because you go from you're given all these diagnoses, you're given all these, problems that you don't know how to solve. And then the Domans start to teach you about what you can do. And from that standpoint, and I think I'm very much like you, just hearing you talk. We're doers. Tell me what to do. Tell my wife what to do, and we'll do it.
Right.
The problem is when we didn't know what to do. And so they give you a program, you go home and you do it. And in your case, what I was reading about Haley and what she's doing now as a college student at Indiana University is mind-boggling to me from where you started. So I do want to say, good job, Mom. I know you're not looking but it's amazing what you've done, and it's amazing what's happened here. But I want to focus on one term you used, and I'd like you to describe this a little bit more, because frankly, you're in this work as well. And so it's great that you're not only a mom, but you're an expert. But you use the term disorganization. And I think sometimes somebody who's watching this, let's pretend, and we're not pretending, but let's say we're talking to a family with a newborn right now, a family that just got home from the hospital or has been home from the hospital for a year or 2 years. And like you and like me, we had children that were not developing anywhere close to on time. And so you're kind of just looking at the child and you're kind of going, I had never heard the term disorganization. I had heard brain damaged. I don't even know if I'd heard brain injured, frankly, but I'd heard brain damaged. I had heard a lot of other terms that are terrible, but I had not been familiar with the disorganization part. Talk about that and how the brain injury, whether it's meningitis in your case, stroke in our case, causes the disorganization that is something that can be fixed, which obviously you've done. So walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a wonderful question. I hope I can do it justice in just a few minutes here. And you'll see that word disorganization or organization, a program of neurological organization in the Doman method work. You'll see it, on my website as well, because it doesn't matter whether it's labels like cerebral palsy. That would be extreme disorganization, meaning the neurons let me back up for a minute. Let me just explain for people who may not have the background that we have what neurons are. So they're tiny little cells that have, they are, I like to call them a metaphor, the fire bucket brigade, because neurons will pass a message to each other without actually ever touching each other. Okay. And everything that we do physically, everything that we're able to do intellectually or cognitively is a result of good coordination or organization of a long chain of neurons passing messages like a fire bucket brigade, like tossing those buckets to each other, not spilling water, getting it where it needs to go. And so every movement that we make is, and through these impulses, these electrical impulses from cell to cell to cell to cell, to the muscles and back to the brain, or from parts of the brain to itself. So when those neurons can communicate with each other in a swift and efficient and organized way, then life is pretty good, right? So the process of growth for children from a baby in utero, from those cluster of first cells, for goodness sakes, but it's all about this growth and connection of networks, of neuronal networks. So if those are organized, if they're working well together, if they know what to do and when to do it, and they continue to grow in their abilities, then we have neurological organization. And that can lead us, let's use mobility as an example, that can lead us from not being able to move much at all, except by reflex, to being able to coordinate our movements, to being able to coordinate them to propel us forward, to eventually push up and go gravity free, to eventually walk and run and kick a ball and do all kinds of, beautiful things that human beings do with their bodies when they're neurologically organized. That's kind of an obvious example on the surface. And if that's not going well, that's pretty obvious, right? Kids who get stuck because of a brain injury. And yeah, what's the difference between injury and damage? I write about this a lot on my blog. If I sprain my ankle, that's an injury. We expect it to get better, right? If I cut my finger, that's an injury. We expect it to get better. We talk about brain damage. Oh, feels very permanent, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The way we label things has everything to do with what we believe about them, and then what we do.
Great point.
So, right? But this neurological organization is pretty obvious, like on those physical mobility issues. But, the kids that I work with, and I was telling you before we started the tape, my daughter had some physical problems as well. But we addressed a lot of those and she improved. She kind of got stuck at this stage of development where she had some cognitive disabilities. And, there are kids out there who it's not as obvious that they're disorganized in parts of their brain that have to do with learning and reading. That stuff all starts with being able to see. Our visual development follows a certain order, and our auditory, being able to hear and understand, that follows a certain order. And if something has happened because of a physical injury, kids drown and fall off bicycles, and things happen to hurt their brains. Things happen chemically as well. We are watching. It's been predicted that in the next decade, at least 1 in 3 children will have autism, some form of autism. That's sensory pathway disorganization. And we know that you can look at the pictures and the graphs. It's a pretty clear story. When we started polluting our food and spraying it with Roundup, I think Roundup's changing their name now because they know they're in trouble. They've just been sold, and glyphosate has a new name, so they can use it somewhere else. But so there are lots of ways to impact the brain and what it should be able to do. It's no longer able to do. So that is disorganization. Those neurons aren't working the way they should, but we can change that, right, Dean?
Right. Amen. That's for sure. And I want to just again clarify for someone. So and I'll just use my daughter as an example for a second. So Ella Claire is her name. She had a stroke in the womb. It was affected the midbrain especially, and so mobility was a huge challenge. So in Ella Claire's case, you put her on the floor on her stomach, and if she was a well child without that brain injury, she would start to move around and then eventually start to crawl and creep and stand and walk and run. And that would happen naturally. I mean,
Right.
and pretty much you put them on their stomach and that happens. Now, LeClaire, we could have put her on her stomach from now until kingdom come, and it wasn't going to happen. She needed the stimulation. She needed stimulation with repetition, with frequency and intensity and duration, in order to help her do things that a normal, well child without that brain injury would do. And so in your case, you with meningitis had certain effects. There was certain injury that occurred, and you were able, through a program that was given to you by the Domans, in this case, the Domans gave you a program that you were able to execute that in essence helped her do things she never would have done. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here.
It is. And I love, you say that she never would have done. And, there are some people that say, well, how would you know? And there are a lot of people say, oh, they outgrow it. Well, they don't outgrow it if you don't help them outgrow it. I mean, they don't outgrow it if you lock them in a closet. We know on the other end, you can deprive children of enough stimulation and opportunity to reduce.
Right. Can I jump in with a quote from the great Glenn Doman real quick? Because you say that, it makes me laugh, because Glenn Doman, I don't know if you remember this, but in his office, he had a stained glass, and it said, I think it was in a different language, but what it said was, because of that kind of criticism they would get, his stained glass window said, "This is the place where things that would have happened anyways happen." Basically poking fun at the idea that the truth is the things wouldn't have happened anyways. I know that for a fact because I watched my daughter develop for the first 2.5 years, and I've watched her develop for the last 17 years. And it's a very different thing. The first 2 versus the last 17. I'm sure you could concur with your first 3 or whatever it was versus the last 24. We've seen it. We've seen the before and after, I guess, if you will.
Yes. And the other thing, this is difficult for me to say. The other comparison I have, which I wish I didn't have, to be honest with you, is with her peers. Those kids that were in physical therapy with her, they're not bike riding and doing gymnastics now. They're not at university.
Wow. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. My daughter was hurt in the midbrain too, not clearly as significantly as your daughter. So Haley had some physical coordination problems, but she was mobile. She was mobile and hyperactive, and rather than immobile. But yes, so it just all depends on which part of the brain, how much, and then what kind of opportunity and stimulation is available to get them through those blocks, right? Trillions of neurons waiting to come online. My master's program, we looked at some of this, and of course I study it. I gobble it all up. This idea that, stem cell research is telling us there are new neurons coming all the time, and they hang around waiting for a job. And if they don't get one, well, they disappear again. And so all the neuroscience is telling us what you and I have just experienced, on our living room floors for years. Right?
Yes. And it's amazing to me, just from a big picture perspective, just hearing you talk. I mean, here we have this brain. I believe God created it. It's a miraculous thing. This little, I don't know how much it weighs, but not much.
6 pounds.
How much?
6 pounds.
6 pounds. Okay. This little 6-pound thing that's in, what it does is just absolutely miraculous. And the truth is, from my perspective, we can learn about it, how it works. I mean, just like anything else, we can actually learn how the brain works, and how, when it doesn't, what we can do to help it work. Because as Douglas Doman says, we use this real small percentage of our brain. And so to be able to know what to do to help it rewire, things that you know a lot more about than I do, but is spectacular.
Yeah, but you know what gets in the way of that, I think, from a professional, from the other professionals that I know, because I don't think neurologists who, are prescribing phenobarbital, and the drugs have changed now, of course. I don't know all the new names, but, they're not trying. I mean, they take an oath, first do no harm.
Right.
But what's different? There's a different perspective. There's a different view. And I think this happens for families too. I mean, some families embrace this the way you and I did, and some families it just doesn't resonate with. And I've noticed it has a lot to do with how attached we get to those labels. I mean, some people really have a lot of investment in being, an autism mom. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I celebrate that. That is a difficult job. But when we get really attached to those labels, like for ourselves or for our kids, it tends to sort of blind our vision, I think, to what else might be possible. And
Yes.
so I think it's important, because that for me, that label of autism is not a thing that person will be forever. It's a stage of brain development. And do those kids need to be supported? Absolutely. Do we need to have places where the auditory stimulation doesn't drive them bonkers? Absolutely. Does society need to come on board and understand these neurodiverse individuals? And, absolutely. But because that's out of respect for them, right? But I think if we want to take respect all the way, then we have to respect them enough to say, well, let's see if we can fix up some of these problems too.
Right.
Right. So let's see if we can get that brain to not be so sensitive to sounds. And doesn't that really respect that individual, because it allows them to live a life that's pain-free?
Right.
Having auditory sensitivity is a painful way to live. And so instead of just focusing on their behavior or teaching them to potty train or teaching them, if we get their auditory sensitivity fixed up, they're not as terrified of the sounds in the bathroom.
Right. Yes.
So, for me, that's where it is. That's my love and respect for that child and those parents that are doing everything they can for that child and just not understanding,
yeah, and,
what's in their brain.
You mentioned the auditory pathway, and I know autistic children with autism tend to have that particular sensitivity, and it affects the auditory pathway for some reason. Who knows? But speaking of that, I remember when Ella Claire, we would get on elevators, and it was terrifying for her.
Oh.
I mean, the sensation of moving up and down, she would just panic, right? And so we could have just lived with that. Oh, she's brain injured, Or what happened to us is we did this program with the Doman folks, and which is at domaninternational.org, by the way. And through that program, all of a sudden, I remember we were somewhere and we got on an elevator and she didn't freak out. And I was just like, wait a second. She's supposed to freak out. She didn't freak out. Why? Because the program, we treated the brain. We could have just put up with the symptoms, put up with the elevator problem the rest of our life, which is, I'm sure, was terrifying for her.
Right.
Or we don't have to, I mean, and again, not that nobody bats 1,000, nobody bats 100%, but the point is, I think you're right. I think the labels sometimes can cause us to put up with stuff that we don't have to put up with. And people don't know, I didn't know.
Right.
I didn't know there was something we could do, Well, first of all, please give our best to Haley. What a spectacular journey she's been on, you've been on. We're going to put your website up on the screen. We only have a minute here, surprisingly, but I want to put your website on the screen. So parents who are watching this that have, from reading disabilities to, learning disabilities, developmental issues, certainly darcyhawkshurst.com, which is on your screen. Real solutions for your child's learning. I would encourage you to reach out to Darcy. On the more kind of severe side, which is kind of where we landed with a major stroke, but domaninternational.org, DOMAN international.org is where they are. So in terms of if you're dealing with a severe brain injury, I would point you to both places. Darcy knows what she's talking about, obviously, as a mom and also an expert in this area. So Darcy, congrats on what you've accomplished, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. Send us your book when you get it.
Will
Maybe
do.
maybe we'll have you back on.
Oh yeah.
And we'll talk about the book.
Oh yeah, it'd be great fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. Say hi to Haley for us, and congratulations on everything that's happened for you guys. It's a beautiful story.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean.
All right. We'll see you next time.